Invite Mr. Sandipan Gangopadhyay, President and COO, GalaxE Solutions on the dais for the keynote address.
Somebody. Yeah.
This one?
No.
Have you saved it already? No.
7.
Just a question. No, I don't have to see the presentation.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for having us here today. We're going to cover a little bit about digital health and what is happening around the world. Over the last couple of days, we have heard a lot about some very innovative and very far-reaching solutions that people have tried out. We have heard about solutions from Estonia, from Finland, from Sweden, from India, and from the US and other countries. What we want to do here is talk about a few different concepts, not comprehensive, but a few different concepts that we feel are important for furthering the capabilities of digital health. And within that, what we're going to talk about also is we have some of our friends today with us from Johnson & Johnson, who will talk about, if we get it right, what is possible. The background for this and the backdrop for this is that not that, that everybody or somebody out there has a solution for everything, but the concept is that there is so much work that has happened in this space. And if you look at the United States, very large-scale solutions for digital health doesn't mean that everything is perfect there. But there are certain elements of these successes that can be used to bring solutions in the Indian context and by extension to other developing countries. So jumping into it, from a keynote perspective, what I'm going to cover is really about e-health standards, patient data portability, and some sort of a unified identifier for people. Based on our experience with digital health in the United States and in as much as it has been implemented globally, we have experienced over the last 27 years that we have been doing this work, that this is critical to get right. And once you get these components right, other things fall into place. None of these are easy, however. So e-health standards, in terms of, the need for that is obvious. A lot of what we talked about, there was a talk yesterday on the immense amount of data available. We are the country of 1.3 billion people and growing, and data should not be the problem so long as we have a good process of capturing it. But it's a challenge. I mean, at the end of the day, some of the solutions that are working overseas, we heard about Estonia, where everybody works off of a smart card or a smart chip in a card. We have United States, where every prescription has a unique identifier, and here you can walk into a chemist shop and literally ask for something and pay in cash, and there is literally no record for that having taken place. And we heard a short while ago about how we are trying to pull demographics at least out of that based on the data we can collect, but we cannot personalize that. We cannot tie it to a specific individual. So to get the standards right is very important, and to solve the problem that with it comes accountability, with it comes transparency, which may be a problem in somebody's business model. It may be a problem for a physician, it may be a problem for a chemist, because it may reduce or it may bring focus on what they do, how they do. It impacts their day-to-day operations. So in terms of the eHealth standards, right now one of the problems we face here is it's limited to no standards and all the other things associated with that. So I'm not going to go into each of the challenges, but to address these challenges, we can take some of the context here is that we can take some of the best practices from various areas. So if you see the picture that's on the screen, that's an ecosystem. That ecosystem works in the United States, which uses a group of entities. So for example, you have a health plan, people have health insurance. Any country that works off of health insurance typically will see an ecosystem like this. And the patient is in the middle, but you have health plans, pharmacy benefits, managers who will process claims. So a physician sees a patient, issues a prescription. The prescription is analyzed, and it is analyzed for a bunch of different things. It is analyzed for drug utilization review. So you really find out if this drug did the physician do the best job possible? If there is something about the patient, there is a medical condition, allergy, something that is contraindicated with that drug, it's going to push it back. There are other things in terms of finding out, do we really need a branded drug? Can it be replaced with a generic? There are a whole bunch of things that happen in that ecosystem. But while it is all driven by data, at the end of the day, you have an enormous amount of information that can be used to identify things like, is there a gap in care? Is there an adherence issue? Is there a behavioral issue with the patient? These things are quite advanced. These concepts called therapeutic resource centers for some of the leading or the highest order diseases like hypertension, diabetes, is very well established in countries like the United States for several decades now. And the concept, the thing that we are trying to talk about is if we can right-size those solutions in the Indian space, if we can use some of the solutions that we have heard from Sweden, from Estonia and others, and bring these together, what can this do for India? The benefits, again, there's a huge number of benefits in getting it right. In India, if we are able to do this, and we are able to take that information into the villages at extremely low cost and in a preventive form, we will be able to radically improve people's health, and that's what this is all about. The other concept is patient data portability. We have someone on the panel today. She has been working both on the standard side with the Bureau of Indian Standards and also has co-founded a company to implement those standards. But there are incredible challenges worldwide with data portability. One thing is, of course, the standards, to get the appropriate standards in place, but then protection of data, avoid misuse of data, ensuring data integrity. These are common challenges worldwide. Again, the concept, what we want to talk about today, is that you are able to bring some of those best practices as these things are built in India. Let's build it right. Let's learn from all the other experiences from around the world and make sure that we have the best of breed solutions and right-sized for making it work in India. We talked about how some of these things that we are doing, we are starting with the cities, but we all know that in order to really move the needle on healthcare, it's the villages and it's the towns that we will have to go. That's where India still lives. That's where the per capita income is the most depressed, and that's where the help is needed most. And these kinds of solutions help us achieve that. A number of standards here that can be utilized, and we will be asking Dr. Siddiqui to talk a little bit about that later on today. And the idea would be that if we get it right, we would be able to give people access to their information as well, so that this is a problem even in the United States today, because many of the physicians' offices do not follow a standard in how they maintain patients' information. If a patient goes from one doctor's office to another, they have to repeat everything. There is no record there, right? And chances are they don't get it right, they miss things. So if we are solving this in India, the point is, let's get it right. And we can get it right now if we address these through these standards organizations in India. Unified identification, one of the coolest things that's happening in India is the Aadhaar system. And it would be awesome if not only the Bureau of Indian Standards but other policy making organizations within India can tie that to the Aadhaar ID. Because it is a unique identifier per person, and what it will do is it will become a primary, for people who know, from a technical perspective, it becomes your primary key, right? Irrespective of how we are interacting with that patient, whether it is from a commercial standpoint, from in a hospital or medicines, we can uniquely identify them and tie all that information together. That allows us to do lots of informatics, that allows us to do predictive analytics in terms of what would be the best solution for them at the lowest possible cost point. So there are a ton of systems out there that once this information is available, that information can be processed for advanced analytics. There's a lot out there in the world today. The challenge is, what do you perform on top of, when you take all these algorithms, what do you run the algorithms on data, right? Where is that data in India? That's the challenge. So if we are able to solve some of these 2-3 unique things, a unique identifier, standards, and data portability, you can have a much more robust solution for not just better organization of healthcare, getting it to the towns and the villages, lowering the cost of that, and truly doing preventive measures around healthcare. With a size of 1.3 billion, we can actually do, and anybody who has a little background in AI and machine learning knows that with that kind of data sets, we can be extremely advanced in terms of what we can do from a preventive standpoint. The other flip side is some of the restrictions around utilization of data. For example, you have United States, like I said, where most largely people have healthcare insurance. That means that there are significant restrictions through standards and laws like HIPAA for utilization of that information. So for example, a PBM or a payer can have enormous information about a patient's claims history and prescription history. Since they were born, they know everything about them. But they can't make that available to a pharmaceutical company easily because that may be a conflict of interest. As we are building these standards in India, we can again solve for those problems. Things are not as restrictive here as some of the speakers earlier today have talked about, that they are gathering data. That kind of gathering of information isn't possible in the United States, Canada, European Union because of data protection and HIPAA standards. So the solutions for India, if we start putting those kinds of blocks, now here we have a problem with getting healthcare to the villages. These things can conflict with each other, and some of the solutions we can build can bypass some of those impediments, and we can freely then collect the information and use it for better healthcare. So for what is possible when you get it right, I'm going to ask my colleague, Mr. Reggie George. He is head of Global Quality IT Systems in Johnson & Johnson, to come up and speak a little bit about what J&J is doing in this space. Reggie?
Thanks, Sandipan. So it's an honor to be here to talk to you about what we are doing from a Johnson & Johnson perspective with a lot of the information. And what we have kind of done, it's J&J is in a very unique position. We are the largest healthcare company that's out there, and we cover the broad spectrum. So the consumer sector, the medical device segment, as well as the pharmaceutical segment. So when we have a population of customers from birth till retirement or sometimes later, we have the opportunity to have a lot of data on the customer. With that, there's also a move within the U.S. to move a lot more to the preventive side. And what we are finding is everyone wants more customized medication. So with the advent of mobile apps and websites, what we found the consumers want is the information right now, right? They don't want to wait to go see a doctor. They don't want to wait to go somewhere. They want to type it into their device and search and figure out what's going on. What we also have discovered is customers want things much more customized to the patient or to that individual. So with 3D printing and other technologies, doctors are able to do a scan and individually figure out what this customer needs, whether it's a new knee, a new heart, a new stent, or whatever the case may be. Robotics. So one of the things that we have found is doctors may make mistakes over time. They might be tired from the night before when they're doing the surgery. Operating rooms are not operating at the top level of efficiency because personnel issues. You might have the doctor available but a nurse not available or an anesthesiologist not available. So with digital surgery, you kind of remove a lot of those dependencies. So we're in the business of also looking at digital surgeries in the operating rooms. Artificial intelligence, very key to our future. So there is thousands upon thousands of white papers and various studies that are done on a daily basis. There's no way any one individual or any one organization can keep up with the amount of data that's available. So we're absolutely using technologies like artificial intelligence and machine learning to help us decide what's the best way to proceed going forward. The US FDA is partnering with us, right? So recently, 2 weeks ago, there was a conference that was done at Xavier University. Where the question was, how do you actually validate artificial intelligence, right? So the government's actually working with us to say, how do we do this and how do we go about this? With all that intelligence is how do you use it? What's the analytics behind it? And wearables and sensors, Internet of Things. So one of the big things that are coming up, especially from the Indian community as well as the Chinese community, almost everyone is now connected. Everyone has a cell phone. So there's a lot of data that's actually available. So Sandipan kind of mentioned that when you go out to the pharmacy, you might not be able to collect who exactly purchased something. But there are ways that we can look at things differently, right? If you have a mobile device, is there something via GPS? Oh, this person's at the pharmacy picking up something potentially, right? Another thing that we've seen within the Johnson & Johnson Corporation is what we refer to as smart pill packs. So when a pill is taken out of the blister pack, you actually know a pill came out of the container. So there's probably things that we can look at holistically to collect this data to actually serve our customers better. Now, just a recent trend that's also happened is the FDA in the US has discovered that you can't treat everything the same, right? You can't treat software as a medical device that is non-embedded, so things that might be on your mobile phone and stuff like that, the same way you treat a insulin pump that has software inside of it, or a heart monitor. So with that said, what I would say is the FDA started something called the pre-check program, and what they are really trying to do is work with the industry to say, what are the right controls to be in place to make sure that we're doing the right things for our patients, because we're moving to an environment where customers want it immediately, but the rules and regulations that are in place today were designed for products that were considered hardcore medical devices, not with the intent of software as a medical device. There's guidances out there, there's white papers out there, but from a regulatory perspective, there isn't really a lot of leeway. So with this said, the FDA kind of reached out to the industry and said, hey, we want to do a pilot program, and they're going to be selecting 9 companies, and the selection should be coming out within the next couple of days. So with that, I'll call Dheeraj up.
Thank you, Reggie and Sandipan, for very insightful keynotes. And now I would request the panel to take their seats. And I welcome all of you to this discussion. And this is the session, that gets you to the lunch. So very important session, right? And I get to be the moderator. I'm Dheeraj Misra, CTO at GalaxE Solutions, responsible for innovation at GalaxE. We have been doing it for 25 years. And today, I will be introducing everyone who's in the panel, and then I get to ask questions. And then when I am done, you also, get your shot at the panelists. So we'll start with Kausik Bhattacharya to the far right. He is a senior manager in IT application services with Johnson & Johnson, and he is currently the product owner of a cloud-based technology solution for project management and compliance in Johnson & Johnson global IT department. So plays a very important role in delivery. And, he gets to, answer, some cool questions now. So, Kausik, the first question that we have for you is, given, the importance of cloud, in all aspects of technology these days, how do these solutions really help?
Thank you, Dheeraj. I think we heard quite a bit about technology over the past yesterday and today. Cloud as a technology may not be so new, but I think what is important is that it is creating disruptions and bringing in the transformations in the way healthcare is happening or going to happen in future. What I'm going to touch upon is that this cloud or the technology behind cloud is giving rise to a complete new set of delivery model, which is trying to make it more agile or faster in terms of converting an idea into an investment and then realizing a product or service that ultimately going to benefit our patient and doctors and nurses and everyone that are associated with healthcare. So what we are seeing from a cloud perspective that it helps in multiple ways. First thing it helps is that the way it improves the scalability of deploying solutions and making it more faster and easier and more iterative. So it frees the resources from the traditional work of designing, implementations, operations, and freeing those resources and helping the resources to focus more on the core domain. It could be the research domain, it could be the customer domain, it could be the business process domain. So everybody, the resource can be more freed up and help improving, focusing on their respective area and improve the whole delivery of the end product or services itself. So that is one of the key things that that cloud can really bring in. The other aspect that we are also experiencing from Johnson & Johnson perspective, that it is helped to build a knowledge-based community. The experiences and the informations that were lying with individuals, through cloud, we can bring them at a more organizational level or institutional level, and that can make the decisioning more standardized and more repetitive and accurate. And it also helps in bringing the multiple departments or the organizations which were so far kind of disconnected or working on in silos. Through these technology solutions like cloud, they can all come together and they can easily interoperate with more interactions and knowledge sharings. So these are some of the things that I just wanted to mention that we are experiencing, and it is really helping us accelerating how we deliver the solution to the market.
Sounds great, Kausik. Thanks for the detailed answer. And I'll move on to Dr. Daya. And he's to my left, and Dr. Daya is the AarogyaSeva, public health enabler, connected humanitarian, affordable medtech catalyst, integrative medicine practitioner, and a motivational speaker. And there's a lot more I can say about you, but I think you get to answer my favorite question, actually. So, one of the things about Indian culture is the inertia is very high, and the way I see technology can help. Not only to reduce the cost and to solve a lot of problems, make it more efficient, but to bring transparency as a side effect. That's one thing I think we are missing in this whole ecosystem. So can you throw some light on what are the things that can be done and your views on that?
Thank you, first of all, for having me on this panel and giving an opportunity to speak. I think I'll give you a couple of examples. Sandipan already mentioned the Aadhaar. Our Honorable Prime Minister, Sri Narendra Modi, quoted, I don't want to misquote, he says, "I dream of a digital India where access to information knows no barriers." Right? And this, a lot of us are seeing this in reality today, but one of the best examples I want to share is the India Stack. How many of you know of India Stack? What India Stack is? Okay, I see just a few hands up. So I think it's a very, very important thing for all of us to know what it is. India Stack is an ambitious project. It's being done to create a unified software platform that brings India's population into this digital age. It's a set of API that allows governments, businesses, startups, and developers to use this unique digital infrastructure. And I think this is something which all of us should familiarize ourselves with, try and integrate into the technology, into the innovations that we are building to actually then bring about transparency and accountability at unprecedented scales. We have about 1.06 billion Aadhaar registrations already, right? Out of which I think there have been close to 3 billion authentications using this. So there are, to explain a little bit, there are 4 layers within this India Stack. One is the presence-less layer. So you don't have to be physically present at a particular location to do a transaction or an interaction. It's paperless, cashless, and the last one is the transparency, right? The consent layer, sorry. The consent layer, which is the locker system that is available. So these 4 layers actually add tremendous value to bring in transparency, but also to democratize the services, to cut down seepage of resources, which is a huge, huge problem in many of our both private and public, mostly public sector interventions. So this is a very, very good example of what a government, an authority can do to bring in transparency and accountability. The next step is for us, for all the other stakeholders to engage with this and also to uptake this service which is available to then bring about transparency and accountability, which is a very important step to then gather data and to see how technology can improve access to healthcare and outcomes of disease. The other thing I want to mention is the Global Digital Health Index, which the WHO is coming up with. So this is an index which looks at tracking, monitoring, evaluating, and scoring the use of digital technology. And I think this is another global index that will, one, bring in transparency, but also some kind of standards in terms of the digital technology services that are available, that are coming up, mushrooming day by day. So I think these are two key points that I wanted to bring about, but I think we can also talk more about this if there are, as an interaction at the next stage.
No, that's fantastic, Dr. Daya, and I know, this is a very sensitive topic, probably one of the hardest challenges to solve in the Indian, environment. Thanks for your answer. I'll move on to Marilia. She's the Senior Director at Johnson & Johnson for regulatory compliance. She has over 17 years of quality and regulatory compliance experience. And in 2011, she became a Senior Director in the Johnson & Johnson Regulatory Compliance Organization with responsibility for information technology areas and supply chain distribution centers. And you are also a certified information systems auditor and a graduate of the J&J Executive Quality Leadership Program. So welcome. And, we all get benefited from medications, pharmaceuticals, that are, produced by the supply chain, medical devices. But it's, there have to be some adverse events, side effects, unintended consequences. Can you educate us a little bit, in the time we have, on what are some of the ways that we can use low cost and reliable methods to track these adverse events?
Sure. First of all, thank you for having me. All of us that work in healthcare, whether it's in a manufacturing environment through industry like a J&J organization or any other area of healthcare, I personally feel we have a very special responsibility. We are talking about caring for people's lives. And, Reggie, when he gave the keynote earlier, talked about Johnson & Johnson being a very large organization. And just to give you a perspective, we have over 125,000 employees worldwide. We operate in 60 different countries. And I say this because we're very cognizant that we touch over 1 billion lives every day. So we have a wide range of products, from pharmaceuticals to medical devices to consumer products, including cosmetics. And all of these things need to be safe. So safety is the top priority. And to measure safety, you need to have some feedback mechanism, some type of information gathering that's very robust and very solid to be able to track the safety of your products. And so adverse event reporting is a regulatory requirement, as it should be, but I think it's also an important responsibility. And when you start to talk about the, and imagine the size of a large organization, and I don't think this is simple in any organization, but a very large organization with a huge portfolio of products, you really have to have robust methods to be able to ensure that you are monitoring and tracking and identifying adverse events. Those are things that, like you said, could be a reaction to a drug, could be severe to mild, but I think also quality, right, of our products. It doesn't necessarily have to be an adverse event. It could be a product quality complaint. So to do this, at least for us in J&J at the scale that we have to do it, and also we have requirements to report to government agencies. There's very strict reporting requirements, especially on the pharmaceutical and medical device side. We really have to use technology. This would be very difficult to do without some type of technology, and of course we use that today. It still involves human beings and manual effort and investigations, and a lot of decision making and logic applied by people. So there's still a lot of people involved in it. but the technology aspect of it makes it feasible. And I think, it can be low cost if you do it right that way. What I'm really excited about the future that I think will enable us to do this in a more low cost but higher quality way is things like machine learning and artificial intelligence. And in fact, our friends at the US FDA, who we do work and partner with and collaborate along with other industry partners, are very interested themselves in utilizing artificial intelligence and machine learning to mine data sets like electronic health records, to proactively look for what we call safety signals and to identify themselves where we potentially could have safety issues. And of course, in the industry side, including J&J, we're very interested in using artificial intelligence and machine learning to do that as well, to become more efficient. But I think even the quality aspect is really important, because whenever you have human intervention logic, no matter how smart people are, you're going to make mistakes. There's some judgment calls and criteria. So I think the technology, bringing it back to the technology aspects, is very exciting for both finding solutions that are cost effective, but I think even more importantly, of higher quality.
Thank you, Marilia. And your perspective is very important, because you have the scale at which you deal at J&J. And in India, that's one of the requirements. But the second requirement is that we need to be able to do at a low cost. Because yesterday we heard 40% of Indians are at $1. And we can't saddle people here with high cost systems. And continuing in that direction, Reggie, to introduce you, this is one job I don't think anybody will envy. He carries, such monumental responsibilities, because he's responsible for all IT QA systems, every medicine, medical device, all across the world. Reggie has to, have a hand in it. So he approves, all the systems that build or contribute to building that medication or a medical device. So you can imagine, the gravity of the role that he plays. So Reggie, we would love to understand, how do we build systems that are fit for purpose and at a low cost? Again, considering Indian market.
Absolutely. So it's an interesting question, because it comes up not just here in India, but all around the world. And the number one failure point that we've seen with our system deployments is we don't take the time to do good requirements up front. We tend to rush and try to deploy something very quickly without truly understanding what the customer needs are. So my strongest advice to folks is take the time to make sure you understand what the requirements are. Take the time to thoroughly test the solution as early as possible. So don't wait till something goes over into the formal validation testing, or even worse, when it's in production, because the cost is going to be significantly higher, right? So same fundamental principles that's always applied, I would say, still applies. But as things are evolving and people are starting to adopt the agile methodology more and more, I would say things tend to get rushed. Take the time to do your due diligence, do the testing up front, do the quality checks up front, and you will end up with better product downstream. Product meaning the system, or even the end product.
Thank you, Reggie. And we are all aware, on how much cost cutting you have been able to do by following these methods at J&J. So thanks for your guidance. Next thing, is extremely important in Indian environment. I'll move on to Dr. Rahil Siddiqui. And yesterday, there was a question asked, of the panel that are there standards in India? So, and then when Sandipan, was talking about, some of the developed markets, the United States market, the European market, there is a circle of standards. So there is an ecosystem in these developed countries, but they all operate within a circle of standards. So talking to you earlier today, I came to know that, you are part of, a bureau of, you know what, let me introduce you. This is another job, that, is extremely challenging, and I wish you all the luck. So Dr. Rahil is a co-founder of Eventus, a flagship product of Siddiqui Technologies Private Limited. Main area of expertise is in implementing various healthcare IT standards to improve the quality of data captured and shared by systems. Dr. Rahil is also a member of the Bureau of Indian Standards, FICCI Health Insurance Committee, and the Indian Association for Medical Informatics. So, Dr. Rahil, can you throw some light or a lot of light on what is the BIS view on standards for operability? I mean, I know that's the question, but can you give us a little bit on, if the standards are there? This is a question from yesterday. Yeah. If the standards are there, where do they stand? And anything, that you can help us with.
Okay, so thank you for the introduction and thank you for the opportunity. I think it's surprising in a way that people are not aware that there are EHR standards for India, but I don't blame the majority of the people, only because I think it's not been communicated very well. In addition to the Bureau of Indian Standards, which vets and puts its decision on a lot of the ISO standards that come within India for approval, the ministry is also involved in a set of standards for India. So the Ministry of Health Holdings, MOHH, has in fact published an EHR Standards for India document. You can find it on the National Health Portal, if you look it up on the internet. Now, this was initially published in 2013, and a revision of this standards document has been published in 2016. So there is something out there for the vendors to comply with. Of course, there isn't any accreditation body yet, but that is being formed, which I'll talk about later. But just talking about the standards itself, we have a set of standards, a stack of standards required for system vendors to implement within their clinical systems. So whether it is, the architectural level standards like ISO 13606, or whether it is the content standards to help with the recording of good quality data like SNOMED CT. We also have the exchange standard, which is the health level 7. You've got even things like the data types. There's an ISO standard, ISO 21090 for that purpose. You've got the patient identification standard, which is Aadhaar. You've got a whole stack. Then you've got obviously the billing and the diagnosis standard, ICD. So there are standards that the government of India has compiled for use within India for India. I think it's, opportunities like this that helps make people aware that these standards are present for use.
Now, that's mighty encouraging for everybody, I bet you. The second question also goes to you. So is there a plan to implement these standards? Because, we'll tell you that and you yourself, have been in this position, in the United Kingdom, that standards are important, but even more important is the implementation of the standards, and then measuring how well they are implemented, tracking, monitoring, and all the good stuff that goes with it. Could you talk a little bit about the plan in place for implementation of the standards in India?
Sure. So again, like Mr. Dheeraj said, it's very important to implement standards. Standards are not a document meant to sit on somebody else's table. Standards are scary. Not many people understand them, which is where you need people with that kind of know-how to help in the process. There is a plan by the ministry, supported by the National Health Portal and other people. I'm part of that committee as well, which is helping to form this body to accredit companies that come up with clinical systems. It might go through a name change, but right now it's called the National E-Health Authority, NEHA. So that is going to be the authority. It'll probably be housed and under the ownership of CDAC, which is also the government body or the autonomous body that holds a lot of the standards published by India for India. So NEHA is going to be the body which will accredit system vendors to check whether they're complying with the standards or implementing it the way it should be. So just on that note, really, I wanted to say, so my background is on healthcare IT standards implementation. I have represented UK while I was there for about 15 years and worked with cross countries, so UK, US, UK, Europe, UK, Australia. I'm doing the same now that I'm in India. And the main goal has always been to make sure that system vendors don't say that standards can't be implemented. We've done that in Eventus, the product. This is not the talk for that. But what I want to say is that standards are implementable. Just don't let the end user know about it. You don't need to scare them with standards. That's for the system to take care of. And I think, standards adoption will increase.
That's a great idea. So one, you are providing a technology, so you are implementing the standards. And then second, you are making it easy. You are making it easy for people to adopt their standards. Telling somebody to, take a bitter pill, it's hard. But if it's embedded in your system, in your technology, it's easier to adapt and adopt, and the work gets done without anybody,
Exactly.
Getting hurt.
Exactly.
Or their feelings getting hurt, really.
Exactly.
Thank you, Dr. Rahil. Next thing, Reggie, we can use, your insight into some best practices that we can learn from, and especially because, you have done it at the scale of J&J, and that's extremely important for, what India really needs. What are some of the new solutions like predictive analytics, SAMD, and ML? How would they receive regulatory approvals? Can you educate us a little bit on that aspect?
Sure. So the good news is, at least in the US, what we're finding is the regulatory agencies are very willing to work with us, right? So historically speaking, the agencies, both the European and the US, they would just come out with a regulation, and it was kind of difficult for companies to comply because we really didn't understand the intent behind it. What we're finding that's different now, and they've actually taken feedback from the industry, is they're working with us, right? They're coming to industry and saying, so what is needed here? Because all of us have the same objective, right? At the end of the day, the objective is to make sure that the services and the medication that is being provided is of the top quality. So if we're all working towards that same objective from a regulatory perspective, it's really working with both industry as well as the regulatory agencies around the globe to really help influence. And you'll see that companies like Johnson & Johnson and many other larger companies are actually working with global regulatory agencies and industry groups to help shape this whole space. Because to be totally honest, there is no one answer, right? And the technology is changing so often that you can't keep up. Because by the time a regulation comes out, the next thing has already come, right? So this is something that is going to continue to keep evolving. And my recommendation to the folks has always been stay current, right? Look at what's coming, look towards the future, try to use these technologies like artificial intelligence and machine learning to help predict what's going to happen going forward too. And we'll get better at this as time progresses, right? But right now, what I would say is the best thing that we've found is working with the agencies and working with industry groups and using the collective knowledge of all of us to do what's right for the industry.
Thank you, Reggie. That's extremely insightful, and the important thing there is that for the Indian market, we do not need to reinvent the wheel. If something has already been done, if J&J has already solved the problem, we get to start from there. We don't need to go through the same, 5-year, 10-year cycle to reinvent it. So thank you, Reggie, for your insight. Dr. Daya, talking a little bit more about transparency, can the transparency help volunteer organizations become more effective? And can they help with democratization and monitoring?
I think that's a very, very important question, and as somebody who's representing civil society here, one of the biggest stakeholders, which is the end user, is missing from this forum. What is accountability? It's a means by which an individual or an institution reports what they're doing or they're mandated to do to an authority or their stakeholders and are held responsible for it. But if those means don't exist, or if those means disappear, then where is the transparency and who is accountable? Right? This is something we saw in the recent deaths of children in a hospital for various reasons, and nobody was accountable. Right? But what can digital health and technology do is change this scenario. It can enable citizens to be informed, to understand and to care for, but also to advocate for their own health. There are innumerable schemes and payouts that the government provides, right? And this can provide direct tracking of those systems. It can provide bottom-up accountability. It can give a voice to the marginalized and the poor who actually are systematically excluded. And for somebody who runs a transnational NGO in 3 continents, volunteers are our main resource. They are our money, right? And how can we engage with them and retain them is by being accountable and transparent. So that's a benefit for an organization like ours to engage. But on the other hand, how do we also make the volunteers accountable? As a nonprofit, we use one of the best and have access to one of the best EMRs, right? And we make our volunteers use that. That means even though they're volunteering, that they're not free from accountability. That's on one end. On the other, you have the whole unorganized healthcare sector. I call it unorganized because there are hundreds of medical camps that happen every day in India. And nobody knows what goes on in these camps. There are millions of patients who are seen by, I think, the several 100,000 nonprofits that exist in villages, in towns. There are so many medicines distributed, but there is absolutely no track of what is happening, who is accountable for all of that. And that also needs to change. And this is a means, I'm not pointing fingers or blaming nonprofits that are doing amazing work. It is much needed. But right now they don't have the means to be transparent and to be accountable. But having low-cost, accessible technology in a handheld device on their mobile phones will give them an opportunity to show that they are being accountable and they're doing great work. And I think this is where innovation and technology can make a huge difference to bring about transparency and accountability.
That's fantastic because, the important point you made is transparency is, of course, important. And we, for, right, wrong, or indifferent, we assume that, people don't want to be transparent. When that's not the case, they may not have the tools to be transparent. And that's very helpful, Dr. Daya. Marilia, can you give us some insights into what are the regulatory impacts of using e-health and any learnings from the international arena, given, that India is making, strides and then some in that direction? What should we, think about? What should we be careful about?
Sure. We're all kind of in the early journey on this, so I think there's a lot of lessons yet to be learned, and by no means is the U.S. that ahead in terms of this. This is really early on. Reggie already talked about some of the implications in terms of the regulatory compliance and how current regulations, when we think about regulations, really were developed for different types of products. Right, so you have your physical medical device, It's not something that's connected, although we're starting to see connected devices, but it's a physical product. And so the current regulatory scheme, whether it's in the U.S. or outside of the U.S., and I'm aware that India is just early on with medical device regulation, is really built for a different time and a different product. And so that makes it challenging for those who want to commercialize and bring innovation to patients quickly to work within outdated regulatory frameworks. And you don't want the regulations they're there to help protect patients to be what impedes getting innovation that helps patients into the market. So we're working through that. I think one of the good examples also that Reggie raised was the US FDA, I have to say, has been very proactive in this space. They've established a digital health unit who is led by a leader, Bakul Patel, who is very proactive in reaching out to industry and wants to work with industry to make this work. But I think internationally, I would say what's important is not to reinvent the wheel, going back to what was said before. What we don't want to see happen is that we have different regulatory schemes around digital health that have nuances and differences country by country, because that just increases the cost of innovative products. It stifles getting the product to market faster, and it makes it very difficult to work within. One of the international, I think, best practices I've seen is through the International Medical Device Regulators Forum, which is a community of 50-plus countries and the health authorities from those countries that have gotten together to start to create guidances in this space. Not official regulation, but guidances. And those guidances really speak to, I think, what we all need to think of in this different product is there's new risks that have to be considered. Things like cybersecurity, and I'm sure cyber is a hot topic at conferences like this. Really, we have to protect patient information, so privacy implications, cybersecurity. But when you start to think about data and collecting data on patients, even from a product perspective, is you now have a new responsibility to think about the life cycle management of that product from cradle to grave. What are you going to do with that data if you decide to discontinue your product? As a commercial organization, we now have to think about that, right? Who owns that data? I'm collecting information on the patient through a medical device. How do I ensure that if I decide to retire that medical device, I can provide that data back to the patient in some way that's useful for them? So I think we're just on the journey of discovery in terms of the challenges that we'll face. That shouldn't stop us from innovating, but I do think we need to think a little bit differently and more holistic about digital products.
No, that makes total sense. So, the Indian market and other markets should feel free to use, the guidance and, the learnings that the United States has. But at the same time, we have to be careful and we have to right-size, all the regulations and compliance policies for our market. Thank you, Marilia. Kausik, quickly, can you, tell us a little bit about, do systems help in guiding, enforcing policies and monitoring adherence? We have a couple of minutes and then I will go to the audience for questions.
Yeah, so I think the short answer is yes. Technology can absolutely help in enforcing the regulations. From a J&J perspective, as we are seeing, we have multiple, when we deliver our products and solutions to the market, there are multiple regulations that are important. It could be information security, it could be the GXP regulations from a good manufacturing, good clinical trial perspective. It could be even data privacy, it could be the digital related, assets related regulations. So there are multiple regulations and many times these regulations are interconnected or interwoven each other. There are interdependencies. So I think one of the things that we saw through cloud, it makes it very easy for us to implement those regulations and standards in a much standard way, so that when you are trying to deploy or develop or design new solutions, you really did not have to think about reinventing the wheel, because you are configuring and deploying. You move to the the actual end product much faster. without going through the nitty-gritty or intricacy of the regulations, because things are already proven or already worked out before. So it really helps in accelerating the solution.
And it helps with the cost too.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kausik. And folks, I would encourage everybody to ask their questions. We have, a very, vast amount of information available in this panel. They can talk about, the entire life cycle of healthcare, from, the pharma companies, where they're inventing, the molecule, to how, patients are consuming it, and everything in between. So feel free to ask your questions, and then, we'll take it from there. And we have 10 minutes, we have waited so long for lunch, we can wait for another 10 minutes. Please.
My name is S.B. Sinha. I am from National Health Mission. My question is to Mr. Kausik Bhattacharya. See, with a lot of these medicines now available on cloud on different sites, so I want to know what is your assessment with after, let's say, 5 to 10 years, all these physical stores will vanish. If not, why not? If yes, then what will these stores do?
Okay. I think this is interesting questions. What will happen in the future down the line? Because we are seeing definitely a lot of changes and transformation that this technology is bringing in. It could be from a marketing perspective, the way we are reaching out to our end customers or our end users of the end product. Definitely there is a lot of change. Like today, if you use the social media, you can see that based on your interactions with the media and based on your interactions, things, the advertisements or the marketing things, they come, based on your preference, based on your need. So there has been a change. I think what extent it will radicalize or transform the way, the stores and all the products that are available in the internet and market will, I think time will be able to tell. I don't want to really go into that predictive mode. But I can see that, or what we can say that, there will be a tremendous impact to reach to the end users and end customers, from a technology adoption perspective.
Thank you, Kausik. Next question, can somebody pass the mic there, please?
Good afternoon, ma'am. My question is to Dr. Rahil, ma'am. Ma'am, my question is, as you are in the committee of Bureau of Indian Standards, my question is like in the recent verdict of Supreme Court right to privacy. So my question is, like, we have a challenges of data security, then hacking of medical devices, and the stealing of identity information. Now in the Indian context, we have Aadhaar card. How safe it is, and if we are talking about sharing of information between the different public institutes and private institutes, interoperabilities come into the play. So my question is, what type of system and mechanism in place BIS is having, and in the recent time? So if you put some light on it, please, ma'am.
Okay, that's a very good question. And in fact, actually, there is still a lot of discussion happening about how much information should be available, because everything is being linked to the Aadhaar. Okay, and this is not a problem novel to India. It's been seen in US, it's been seen in UK, where there is a number, identification number, which is shared between different government bodies, and the impact of information available from one can actually do injustice to the person in another sector. Okay, so the discussion happening right now in India is around whether we should have a separate health identification number, separate from Aadhaar. Okay, Aadhaar is there, but is that something we need to mandate for recording health information about a person. Yes, a lot of the information is sensitive, and people, like my panelist over here said, we have a responsibility, whether as healthcare implementers, IT solution providers, or care providers. We have a responsibility towards the patients who are moving in this cycle. So although there is no solution yet, there are discussions happening. The BIS has got certain security standards which are doing the rounds for approval. It's also being discussed in the Indian Association of Medical Informatics, where a lot of the discussion around health informatics happens. So let's see what happens. But yes, this is a very, very good question.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
I think we have time for just this question. Please go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Shantanu, and I am very, very pleased to hear the panelists share their experience. It's been a very insightful session. Digital health is close to my heart. So if I may ask anybody in the panel to respond to this, my understanding of traditional information and intelligence that exists, Big Pharma has traditionally been sitting on a lot of data all these years. Insurance companies have been sitting on so much transactional data all these years. Healthcare providers have been collecting all the patient records and electronic health records all these years. So there is no dearth of information as far as they're sitting in isolated silos all over the place. And digital health is trying to bring all this together. My challenge or question to all of you sitting there is, are you all ready to work together and make this all work? Because is it all about product to market or reducing loss ratios or bringing patients in? And I was glad to hear that so many of you are working with the regulatory authorities, which is news to me, but I wonder under what motives and what business drivers are happening across the different industry sectors. And is this all going to work towards the wellness of mankind eventually? So it's a, I don't know, largest question, but if you could address that in some form.
Reggie, you start, then
I'll start it off, and then I'm sure others have input as well. So the example that I used from a regulatory perspective absolutely was to the regulations. But for sure, the industry groups are working together. And it's actually going beyond just pharmaceuticals and medical device companies. We are sharing and working with payers, providers, as well as other pharmaceutical medical devices companies. To your point, there is a lot of data that is available. How do we actually use all that data it's going to be an interesting outcome, right? So a company like J&J, we have a very complex IT infrastructure landscape. Just because it's in a technology doesn't mean it's easy to take out and do something with it. There's still work that needs to be done to harmonize the data and make it usable. So there are newer technologies that are coming up that's making that possible that wasn't available to us in the past. There's also some level of privacy and confidentiality that we have to keep. There are certain things that we just will never have access to, right? Because it's not appropriate for us, the retailer of something or the seller of something, to know about. But I think what we are seeing a lot more of is industry folks talking to each other, right? It might not be specific to a specific person and all that data, because yes, in the US there are unique identifiers like social security numbers. I was going to give you mine. But at the end of the day, what I think what we're seeing is, with the advent of technology and with the ability to use technology to your advantage, and really with the driving force of helping patients come to better solutions, we are starting to see companies work together. But I'll let Sandipan and Marilia, others.
Sure. One situation we have is that we as a company work with almost all the large payers and pharmas in the United States, and PBMs and pharmacies and specialty pharmacies. So, and I talked about a little bit earlier during the keynote that the first impediment to working together is regulation itself, because there is a conflict of interest between patient data, claims data. Typically, claims data is not, visible to a pharmaceutical manufacturer. The second thing is motivation. I think you asked, what is the motivation? Over time, we are seeing that that is being solved because there are common endpoints around lowering cost, increasing efficacy of therapies, and it's all, a lot of it is driven by something called the Accountable Care Act, where healthcare providers are responsible for the outcomes. And that's what allows people to align their motivations. And unless that happens, this is not going to work. In India's context, though, why it becomes very important is because there isn't any HIPAA here yet in its current form. There is an opportunity to get these symbiotic relationships correct as the regulations come up. So what we are suggesting here is that as a HIPAA-like instance is created in India, let us not build these impediments in there. Let's make sure that when it comes to patient safety and patient therapy and outcomes, let's remove those barriers so that the motivation exists for people to work together. And it certainly is happening with lots of impediments on the way. And I think in India we can clear a lot of those log jams as we work together. Does that answer the question? Marilia, do you want to say a few words?
I think you've said it perfectly. The only other thing I would add is this may be unusual for a big pharma company, because we do have a pharma division, but we actually have a goal, which is to eliminate disease. And I'm seeing personally in action a lot of those things happening within our own company to make data that we can make available for the use of society, for research, to actually eliminate disease. So an unusual goal for a pharma company, we do have that goal. Oops, sorry.
Thank you, Marilia.
Dheeraj.
Thank you.
Just
Yeah,
one
go ahead.
short point. Just on that point, and just trying to let you know what's happening within India. There is another government initiative, the IHIP, the Interoperability Healthcare Implementation Platform. So it is sort of like a central summary records server on the cloud, which is being proposed by the government, which is essentially for trying to make sure that different system vendors push data onto this so that it's available to people at the right place at the right time to make sure that the care of the patient is addressed in the best possible manner. Because one thing is about reducing cost. The second and more important thing is to make sure that data is available and good quality data is available. So small steps. I know there are a lot of people who think this can never be done, but I'm a hardcore optimist, and I do believe that if everybody contributes their bit to ensuring that the quality of data that they are recording within their systems is good, then the government initiatives are something that can be expedited, something that can become a reality in a nation like India, where there is so much data being sort of recorded in all sorts of fashion, but also because we have such disparities in the kind of population we have, people who can access really high care, affordable health care, and then the people at the grassroots who are going and being seen by quacks. So if we can do something just as people implementing healthcare to improve what we do within our own systems, we can definitely support the government.
Thank you, Dr. Rahil. And thank you, audience. And I'll conclude, first of all, you have been great audience, for participating in the discussion. Thank you, panel. And I will conclude by thanking Dr. V.K. Singh. I'll tell you one thing that, in India, there is no dearth of innovation, no dearth of talent. We have, invented, Apple Watches and God knows what for the entire world. The thing that's missing is bringing, everybody together. And I really thank you for, giving us this forum to be together and to share our experiences. And I really do hope, that this has a snowball effect. And next year, we come in, twice the size, 5 times the size. And, so thank you, everybody, and especially Dr. V.K. Singh, for giving us this forum.
Thank you all. I request keynote speaker Mr. Sandipan Gangopadhyay to present a token of appreciation to all the speakers and session moderator. Mr. Kausik Bhattacharya. Ms. Marilia Cavaco. Mr. Dheeraj Misra. Dr. Dayaprasad G. Kulkarni. Mr. Reggie George. Dr. Rahil Siddiqui. I request Dr. Janus Pikani to please felicitate our keynote speaker. I request you all to please join us for lunch, and we will resume the next session at around 2:15.